I'm going to repay the favor of that kind introduction by evoking a picture back from 20 years ago. Yasser, Tommaso Poggio, Pietro, and myself and Serge, along with the founder of, one of the founders of Logitech, started Digital Persona way back when. And it's really arguably one of the first consumer applications of computer vision. We won Best of Comdex way back in '97 with a $99 product that attached to the PC and replaced passwords. But it demonstrates how long it can take to change consumer behavior as well. Being a pioneer can be tireless work as well. We followed a fairly good path just to kind of, maybe touch on a little bit on the past to maybe give some wisdom on the future, not just in biometrics, but in maybe other fields as well. We started down a path of primarily focusing on OEMs. So we were super excited to win things like the design win for Microsoft fingerprint keyboard. So Microsoft took our technology, put out a line of fingerprint products around that, as did HP, Dell, IBM, various points, Samsung. But also I'll say that as exciting as that was, those things really didn't turn into businesses. We were components of a larger solution. And so as I also hear and think about some of the technology the really cool technology that I hear in autonomous cars and such, it also a little bit harkens back to me as kind of a something to at least keep in mind. The business, and at least in our case, wasn't the OEMs. The OEMs were wonderful validation. They were great projects. But ultimately, for us, that validation then needed to turn into going after end customers. So just to kind of give an example, today, selling to fingerprint technology to places like Wendy's, Pizza Hut, McDonald's, Best Buy, in that particular application, kind of for solving employee fraud, that's a $90 million a year business today. The OEM business, although very sexy, is probably about a $12 million a year business. So ultimately, it's important to try to, unless you're going to sell early to the big companies, at least in my experience, you really have to build a brand yourself, and that's really important to think about that. Well, of course, fingerprint technology probably is now in everybody's pocket. We probably almost everybody in this room has either has a mobile phone that has a fingerprint reader on it. Obviously, owed to Apple to really bring on that acceptance. And fingerprints now, some phones are starting to get iris, more with face, speech, behavioral. But I would also argue that, at least from my perspective, that's not where the sexy problem is anymore. Authentication, to me, the notion of using a biometric as an authenticator is largely a solved problem. A lot of the reasons why the companies, Apple or Google and Samsung are putting in other biometric technologies isn't really, so to speak, because fingerprint isn't working. It's just to give users more convenience, more options, different modalities of usage. But generally speaking, I see that the mobile phone is really becoming the authentication token, and fingerprints and other biometrics are just a very easy way to authenticate to that. What I wanted to introduce actually today is something that, in the US at least, we really don't see much about. And that is something that I think is really going to be the next generation of the use of biometrics, which is actually happening mostly outside the United States and in emerging markets. But I think that there's tremendous opportunity to bring those similar concepts into the US as well. And that is the use of biometrics as an identity. So for instance, in India, well over 500 million people are enrolled now with a combination of fingerprints, face, and iris recognition to create a unique identity. And the difference in this case between identity and authentication with authentication, you're authenticating to your phone, but I could, anybody could enroll their fingerprint into my phone. There's no proof of identity. You're just authenticating. It's just a convenient way of authenticating into your phone. It's not proving actually who you are. Whereas with the systems that are emerging right now very rapidly, I would say there's probably more people that are using fingerprints in India than fingerprints on cell phones, even though in the Western world, I'll say, we think that everything is dominated around the biometrics being enabled by the cell phone. In the case of the India Aadhaar, or it's also sometimes called UAD-AI, this is becoming the de facto, there was a vacuum of identity. And this is becoming the de facto standard for when you open up a bank account, when you need to take out credit, when you purchase a cell phone. And this is very much facilitating financial inclusion. There's just a total vacuum of identity in India. And now this is being carried into other countries with similar programs underway in Indonesia, throughout different countries in Africa, different places. So kind of that proverbial anecdote where other emerging markets might have leapfrogged and were actually first, say Israel or other countries were first with mobile phone infrastructure, and the US really built that out later. I think the similar type of context could be happening with identity. And it isn't as if identity isn't a really important problem to solve in the Western market as well. When we think of identity, a driver's license, a government-issued identity here, is pretty crappy. I have no way to prove that this is a real legitimate driver's license. I mean, there's no way. I mean, even when you go to the TSA, they actually don't scan this to prove that it's okay. They just look at light or something like that to see if it's physically reflecting properly. It's just incredible how poor identity infrastructure is, and that's reflected in the fact that identity theft and identity fraud in the U.S. is one of the main consumer problems. Actually, the FTC says it's the #1 consumer issue, and it's only being solved in a very reactive way. Things like LifeLock and such, where, if somebody steals your identity, then it pops up and says, somebody stole your identity. There has to be more proactive solutions to solve that. And I really think that biometrics are going to be the way to make that happen. But of course, in the Western world, we're not going to round people up to be biometrically enabled. And I think that that's where some of the new things, and there's some very important extra components that are just recent developments that will actually solve this problem in a privacy-enhancing way, where it's not that you have your biometric in a big central database, but you can still rely on biometrics as the foundation of your identity. And that actually come back to the mobile phone. We can now, unlike in India or in emerging markets, we really can, and in those markets too, it's getting there, but we can rely on ubiquity of the mobile phone. We in the U.S. probably having an ID card is getting to that point of saturation where that's possible. Furthermore, secure processing, where you can have trustworthy computation on the mobile phone. You can have unique, blockchain technologies are coming up, where you can have an identity ledger that is kind of proven to be unique and unalterable. And then just the myriad of sensors now that are becoming really good on mobile phones, be it cameras or GPS or other things, make it realistic to say that the mobile phone can be that ID card replacement. And then allow the user to be in complete control of all of their data. So the data then isn't in a central repository. It is, it could be upon user choice, it could be backed up centrally if they decide to, but it would be in complete user control on their device. So how does this manifest itself in practice? Well, one building block that I would see for this type of scenario would be kind of picking up on something like the trends around chatbots and such. Imagine if there was something like a notary bot, where you have something where the equivalent of a notary, an artificial notary, a virtual notary, would query identity databases and ask you to enroll. And then the dynamic fusion then of your responses, the video of your face, the video of your voice, the video, your speech, potentially some correlation into just validation of lip movements, will be, pretty much a dynamic equivalent of what you would get if you went into a notary one-on-one. So why not scale that out? Why not just give it as a virtual notary, still checking the databases, and then the fusion of multiple biometrics solves the dynamic issue. I couldn't just have replayed a video of you or something like that because the questions are dynamic. The validation of fusion of multiple biometrics solves that issue. And then get confirmed credentials of that identity now bound biometrically to that user on their mobile device, and then a unique identity placed into a blockchain type environment. So where I see this in a big picture is that a next generation identity platform, and this isn't to say that this would subsume these other ones, but just to kind of put it in context, the identity world has been, of course, Google has identities, but largely they're inferred. There aren't many accounts per se. I mean, there are accounts, but let's say writ large, it has a lot to do about inferring where you've searched, what you've said online, things like that. So that's inferred credentials. Facebook and LinkedIn is much about self-attested credentials. On LinkedIn, you self-attest that you went to a certain school, that you self-attest that you have a certain job. There's no little green checkbox that proves that I did that, had that accomplishment. I see that there is a place for something like what I'll call CertifID, which is much more around now linking that biometrically to things which have been validated, and also potentially even crowdsourced. So the use of voice and face, you can also have some web of trust, or your friends, let's say, vouch for who you were or who you are, because you can't do that with a fingerprint. I don't know what my friend's fingerprint looks like, but I can do that with a little video snippet. So where does this take us? And what I wanted to really just put out the call today, I really believe there's a moonshot opportunity here in the identity space. You have a situation where one of the weakest unsolved areas of the internet and actually society in general is the authoritative nature of being able to, if I choose, prove who I am. Opening up a bank account, getting a new job, whatever that may be. And I personally don't think that, at least in the US, this is going to be the domain of the large companies. It's not within the business models of the Googles or Facebooks. And it's actually very problematic for the US government, and at least at the federal level, to do something like this. So I think it will come, they're too handcuffed, and I think it will come from more the grassroots, maybe even open source, maybe some other type of approach. But it will come from more of a bottoms-up type approach. So with this aspiration, I just wanted to put out a call. I sold Digital Persona about 2 years ago. I'm dreaming about the next big thing, and I really deeply believe this is. But I need the right people, the right partners to make that happen. And so I just thank you for your time and the opportunity to present this vision to you. Thanks.